You know that moment when you think you're about to have a peaceful Sunday morning, coffee in hand, birds chirping, and then bam, someone decides they're going to turn your life into a full-blown legal drama. Yeah, that's exactly what happened to me and my wife Emma the day our HOA president, Karen Walsh, decided we owed $2,500 for parking 6 inches wrong in our own driveway. She said it with the kind of smug authority you only hear from someone who's been waiting all year for this power trip. My wife just smiled calm, almost too calm, and said, "I'll handle it." What Karen didn't know was that Emma wasn't some timid housewife. She was a state court judge hiding in plain sight. We'd only been in Meadowbrook Heights for 8 months. Picture manicured lawns straight out of a magazine, rules stricter than a military academy, and Karen, the former IRS bulldog who'd been kicked out for being too aggressive running the HOA like it was her personal fiefdom. She had a radar for anything she could fine you for. Flowers not on the approved list. $75. Mailbox an inch too tall. $150. Emma paid them without a fuss, never arguing, just smiling politely. And that drove Karen insane. She mistook patience for weakness, which turned out to be her biggest mistake. What Karen didn't realize was that Emma was documenting every single interaction. Photos, dates, quotes, copies of notices. When Karen hit us with that $2,500 fine, she thought she'd broken us. Instead, Emma said, "I think it's time Karen learned about real legal authority," and disappeared into her office with a manila folder. She started collecting stories from neighbors: fines for Christmas lights being the wrong shade of white, penalties for a garden gnome, threats over flat placement. Karen's pattern of abuse was bigger than we thought, and Emma was building a case that would take her down completely. Then Karen's demands got ridiculous. 137 handwritten apology letters to every household, personal door-to-door apologies, even a community service orientation where she lectured Emma for 2 hours about mailbox colors. Emma did it all, smiling, agreeing, taking notes, letting Karen dig her own grave deeper. By Friday, Karen called an emergency HOA meeting to publicly shame Emma. The community center was packed. Karen rolled out PowerPoint slides, photos, measurements, her case against Emma. When she finished, she demanded $3,500 in penalties and a 6-month probation. The room was silent. Emma stood, thanked Karen for her thorough documentation, and asked for the legal basis of her authority in writing. Karen, thinking she was untouchable, wrote it down, essentially confessing to claiming powers she didn't legally have. 2 days later, Sheriff Jake Miller showed up. Karen had called him to arrest Emma for theft of community services. She started waving her folder, barking about criminal charges. But when Jake started asking questions, Emma's legal expertise showed. Then he recognized her. She had sworn him into office 18 months earlier. "Your Honor," he said, mortified. The room shifted instantly. Emma handed him the week's worth of documents, Karen's fake legal claims, threats, bogus fines. Neighbors began speaking up about their own harassment. Jake realized he wasn't mediating a neighbor dispute, he was looking at a criminal harassment case against a judicial officer. Emma could have pressed charges and destroyed Karen's life completely. Instead, she offered a deal: resign from the HOA, apologize in writing to every family, repay every improper fine, complete 200 hours of community service helping elderly and disabled neighbors, and attend anger management counseling. If she broke any condition, the criminal charges would be back on the table. Karen agreed. Over months, she transformed, returning over $8,000 in fines, delivering groceries to seniors, making repairs for disabled veterans. Our HOA rewrote its rules, replaced the old power structure, and became a real community. Property values went up, but more importantly, people actually enjoyed living here again. Karen even started coming to neighborhood barbecues not as the queen of the block, but as a regular neighbor. It wasn't instant forgiveness, but it was progress. And Emma? She showed me that the quietest person in the room might be holding the most power, and that real justice isn't about crushing someone, it's about fixing what's broken. Karen picked the wrong housewife to mess with and learned that the hard way. Sometimes karma shows up in a judge's robe, and when it does, it doesn't just punish, it changes everything. So now I'll leave it to you. Was Emma right to give Karen a second chance, or should she have gone for the legal knockout? Drop your thoughts below, because this one's bound to spark a debate. You'd think that after everything, life in Meadowbrook Heights would just roll back into that picture-perfect suburban postcard, but here's the thing about real life. Even when the big storm passes, you still find little puddles in the driveway days later. And some of those puddles, well, they can turn into something bigger if you're not careful. At first, it felt like we were living in a different neighborhood entirely. People waved when they passed. Kids played soccer in the street without anyone clutching a clipboard and writing down unsanctioned recreational activity. We had potlucks again. Even Mrs. Peterson started putting out those ridiculous inflatable flamingos she loved, without fear of a citation. And Karen, yeah, that Karen was keeping her head down, showing up to community service shifts like clockwork, checking groceries for expiration dates, carrying heavy bags for old folks. She didn't just vanish into shame, she stayed present, which, I've gotta admit, took guts. But the real surprise. A few months in, Emma got a knock on the door. It was Karen, holding a small stack of papers and looking like she'd just come back from court, which, in a way, she had. I thought you should be the first to know, she said. I've been talking to the board about making some permanent changes to the HOA charter. For a split second, I swear my hand twitched toward the doorframe like I needed to brace for impact. Permanent changes. Coming from her, Emma, of course, just smiled that calm, unreadable smile and invited her in. Turns out, Karen had spent those months not just doing the service hours, but actually listening to people. She'd been hearing the same stories Emma collected: the absurd fines, the intimidation, the little humiliations that chipped away at people's peace. And she wanted to help tear down the parts of the system that made it possible in the first place. Yeah, I know. I didn't see that one coming either. Here's the twist though: when Karen brought the proposed changes to the rest of the HOA board, not everyone was thrilled. Some of those folks had been Karen's biggest cheerleaders when she ran things like a mini dictatorship. Power attracts a certain type of person, and just because the queen stepped down doesn't mean the court disbanded. They were worried about losing control, which was their polite way of saying they didn't trust people to be good neighbors without a rulebook thicker than the state tax code. It was déjà vu, but this time, Karen wasn't the one holding the hammer. She was standing on our side of the table. That's when Emma did something I still think about. She didn't swoop in and win the argument for Karen. She sat back and let Karen fight her own fight. And Karen, to my genuine shock, was good. Not aggressive, not vindictive, just clear, firm, and maybe for the first time in her life, fair. She argued for transparency, for rules that made sense, for giving people the benefit of the doubt. Watching her, you could almost forget the woman had once tried to have my wife arrested over a parking job. And here's the thing, she won. Not all the changes, but enough. We got rid of the most ridiculous fines. We cut the board's power to issue penalties without a majority vote. We even added a clause that said any HOA leader caught misrepresenting their authority would be immediately removed and barred for life. I'd be lying if I said I didn't enjoy watching that one get unanimous approval. Of course, there's always the lingering question: was Karen's redemption genuine, or just a clever way to keep some influence? People still whisper about it. Some neighbors forgive, some never will. Me? I'm somewhere in the middle. I've seen what she's done since, and I can't ignore the fact that she's made more deposits into the Good Neighbor account than withdrawals lately. But I also know what she's capable of if she ever lets that old power itch take over again. The last time I saw her, it was at a summer block party. She was flipping burgers at the grill, laughing with the same folks she used to find for mismatched curtains. For a second, I thought, maybe this is what real justice looks like, not just punishment, but change. Then Emma walked past me carrying a tray of lemonade and whispered, "Never forget, Tyler, second chances are a gift, not a guarantee." And just like that, I knew the story wasn't over. So, tell me, what do you think? Can someone like Karen truly change for good? Or is redemption just a pause before the next storm? Because in neighborhoods like ours, peace is always temporary, and sometimes, the quietest streets hide the loudest histories.